Okay, I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this special Snotalk Speaker Forum that is co-hosted between, of course, Snotrac, Snohomish County Transportation Coalition, and then the Everett Station District Alliance. Today, we have with us Erik, Ashlie-Vinke, and Carrie Avila-Mooney with Sound Transit to provide an update on the Everett Link Extension and how their current realignment planning might affect the planning work for Everett Link. Just as a background, Snotrac advocates for connecting people and communities in Snohomish County with safe, equitable, and accessible transportation. And we aim to bring people together from human service agencies, transportation agencies, and other organizations to find mobility gaps or transportation gaps and figure out solutions. So we are pleased to have you with us today. And with that, I am going to get us started. Just by way of agenda, we have two components to this. One is a presentation from Sound Transit, and then after the presentation, we'll do Q&A. And then the special part of today is the ESDA has put together a few renderings of conceptual, like really early, just to give you a sense of the speakers here, of not the speakers, but the attendees here today, of what light rail might look like when it comes into Everett Station, like in 2036 or 2038. We'll find out today. So we just want to make it real, and then Sound Transit itself will do the alternatives analysis and we'll come up with the real renderings in the future years, just so that's clear. And Erik and Carrie will be able to walk us through that later. But we have some illustrations to help show that for you today as the last 30 minutes of the presentation. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. And I think, Erik, you're leading the PowerPoint, and then Carrie, you're supplementing. So I'll let you figure that all out.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to hijack your screen. Let's see if we can get this right. Does everyone see the presentation? Oh, not yet. There we go.
Erik, before we get too far, just I think it would be really nice if people could sign in the chat. So provide your name and your organization within the chat. And that will be an open place for questions or comments as we go through. And it's an easy way to monitor them and mine them for future Q&A later. So please do add them into the chat. With that, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Can everyone see the presentation?
Good.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Brock. Thank you everyone for having us here today. This really great opportunity to reach out. I know it's been a while since we presented to either Snotrac or ESDA, so to have both of you kind of in the same room is fantastic. Before we get started, I'm just going to introduce myself once again. Erik Ashlie-Vinke. I am the Government and Community Relations Manager for the North Corridor. And with me today is Carrie Avila-Mooney. She is the Director of Government and Community Relations. So she is my boss and knows all. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. Three things we really want to talk about today, and that being really just what's happening between now and 2024, current construction and the stations that are opening, talking about Everett Link and what that looks like, and our realignment process. So most of you probably know this, but I'm going to go over it anyways. Our Sound Transit system is a 160-mile network across the Puget Sound. That's over 1,000 square miles, 51 cities, includes urban areas of Pierce, King, Snohomish counties. As you can see here, we have 28 light rail stations under construction throughout the region, opening in stages between this year and 2024. We provide three types of service: ST Express routes connecting cities in the region, the Sounder train, which most of you are familiar with, connecting Everett and Seattle and Lakewood and downtown as well, and Link Light Rail. This is what I love to talk about right now because we have so much going on right now. As you can see, these are some of the I think all 28 of the stations that were opening between this year and 2024. The one that is on our minds the most right now is Northgate, as 3 stations will open this October, on October 2nd. And why that's a big deal to Snohomish County is that's the first connector to Linwood Link. And so in a few years after Northgate Link opening, we will have Linwood Link open 4 stations overnight and really transform the region. As you look at this, you could see stations all the way out to Redmond, down to Federal Way, East Link is really going to change the landscape of how we get around overnight. All right, so talking about Everett Link, you've probably seen a lot in the news about what's happening with realignment. We'll get to that, but let's just take a second to step back and look at what Everett Link is. So as you can see, 16 miles, this map here on the right is what we call the representative alignment. And this shows what the voters passed in 2016 with ST3. You get 6 stations, 2 parking facilities, plus this provisional station that, if my cursor works, is right here at SR 99 Airport Road. And essentially, that's what the voters voted on in terms of here's where the stations are generally going to be. And we'll talk a little bit about more where that process is going here in a couple slides. But first, I just want to point out, we'll also have an operation and maintenance facility, which we'll talk about in the next slide, that's critical to the system. As you can see, 37,000 to 45,000 projected riders daily in 2040, and start of service at this point, 2036. I say that because as we talk about realignment, we'll talk to how that might change and what that looks like, and how everyone on this call can be involved in the process. So let's talk quickly about the operation and maintenance facility north. This picture here on the right shows you the central OMF. And essentially what this is it houses our light rail vehicles. It's where we store and maintain them. It's a lot different than what people tend to think about a maintenance facility typically. It's, as you can see, really clean, pretty quiet compared to a lot of maintenance yards, and provides a bunch of good family wage jobs. Our estimates on the OMF North would be somewhere between 450, probably closer to the 450 to 500 range. And this is critical to the system and its operation. So under, I think, pretty much all circumstances, this is built to support the system as a whole. So as far as where we're at with Everett Link right now, I think it's hard for people to look out and think, okay, in 15 years, this is going to be done. What does that look like? And so obviously the process takes a long time, and we've just kicked off phase 1 of alternatives development. And so we're working with stakeholders and jurisdictional partners right now to essentially get that work kicked off. In the coming months, we'll see an elected leadership group that will be elected leaders throughout the region to basically look at where this preferred alignment is going to end up. As I showed on the map earlier, you could see we had what the representative alignment shows. Now we have to work with the community, with the environmental aspects, all of these inputs that go to where the station might actually be in order to deliver that to the next phase. And what that next phase will be is basically over this 18 to 22 months, working with community and all the stakeholder groups that I just mentioned, we will come to a point where the Sound Transit Board identifies a preferred alternative and other alternatives for the draft EIS, otherwise known as the environmental review. So that's a big critical step. And why this matters really is essentially in this next 18 to 22 months, we'll kind of be able to hone in on where these stations are going to be. Right now, you could guess anywhere in this mile radius of where we've pictured it, but as you know, there's environmental impacts, there's community impacts that we all have to be aware of as we go through the process. And so this visual is kind of just a high level, this is what it looks like in phase 1 of where we're at. So as you read in the news that realignment is happening, yes, we'll talk about that. But right now, Everett Link is actually moving on its way, and quite well, thanks to the jurisdictional partners. And so, with the stuff that's happening up in Everett, specifically with Brock and Ed's work on the convergence, I don't know if anyone caught that presentation yesterday, but it was fantastic. And so I think that our jurisdictional partners have done so much work leading up to this that we're in a really good position to move forward. And so before we get into realignment, I'll pause there and see if there are questions from the audience, specifically about Everett, and then we'll dive into realignment. And we can come back to questions at the end as well. All right, so with that, why don't we pass things off to Carrie?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As Erik said, I'm Carrie Avila-Mooney, and I'm the Director of Regional Government Community Relations at Sound Transit. And I really am grateful for the time, your time today, to talk more about program realignment. And we're here to answer your questions. And and get your feedback as well. So thank you for your time. So I'm going to start with this slide here that shows the pie graph of the percentages of where Sound Transit gets our revenue. So the majority of our revenue comes from sales tax. That's 53%. And then other tax revenues total are 66%. That includes the INVET and property tax. And then we have debt funds, which is about 18%, fares 7%, and then we do have 8% that comes in from grants. So that's the total revenue percentage of our revenue sources over the life of Sound Transit's financial plan, which goes all the way, currently all the way till 2041. Next slide. So the current 25-year capital program started in 2016 after the approval of Sound Transit 3 and goes through 2041. And in Sound Transit 3, and in the system plan, the Sound Transit Board is required to maintain an affordable financial plan, which is defined by not exceeding debt capacity within our 25-year planning horizon. So when the pandemic started and all of us, all agencies and started to see a revenue decrease, and at the beginning it was a very alarming drop of revenues, and that in mostly our tax revenues. And so Sound Transit immediately started to say, like, okay, we are starting to see that our financial plan will not be affordable. And so we started a conversation with our board to identify the lower revenues that were coming in. And at one point, we were seeing lost revenue of up to $8 billion. And we have updated numbers here. Just in April, we updated the financial plan, and we are seeing good news that the revenue loss due to the COVID recession is much less than we thought it was originally, as our sales tax has recovered and as other public agencies are seeing that the recession is not as bad or recovering more quickly than we originally thought. So currently we're looking at lower revenue of $1.5 billion. And in the meantime, while we started this conversation with our board about program realignment due to lost revenue, we started to see that the projects in the pipeline were coming in with higher cost estimates. So this is a trend we've seen over the last few years, but some skyrocketing cost with certain projects. And so those higher costs are now estimated to be $6.4 billion. So while we had started the conversation about lower revenue, the board decided to deal with this affordability gap jointly. And so the total estimated affordability gap, which includes the lower revenue and the higher cost estimates, is currently at approximately $8 billion, so $7.9 billion. And therefore, our financial plan is not sustainable, it's not affordable, and the board needs to take action to make sure that our financial plan is affordable. Next slide. So the board has tools to bring us back into affordability. One is cutting cost. So this is looking at project scope and seeing where there may be reductions or suspending or canceling projects. Currently in our board conversation about program realignment, canceling a project has not been part of the conversation, but it is a tool that's available. It's not a popular tool with our board. We are also looking at raising new revenues through issuing higher debt or seeking additional state or federal funding. And currently, we have seen through COVID relief packages an increase in federal funding that did help narrow our affordability gap for our revenues. And we'll continue to work with our federal government partners to look for additional federal funding. Sound Transit really does see ourselves as part of recovery and building back better. And so we are well suited to continue to work with our federal partners on trying to keep all of our projects on track. And then the board also has tools to delay or phase projects. So spreading cost over time, even beyond 2041, to keep our agency under the debt limit, the current legal limits. Next slide, please. So as I started to talk about Sound Transit being well suited for recovery, the Sound Transit 3 package and all the projects that are in it on top of Sound Transit 2, we are a huge part of creating and sustaining jobs. So projects now under construction, and those projects that are under construction are not subject to program realignment. But we've employed nearly 20,000 workers to date, just with the projects under construction currently, 12.2 million labor hours, 558 million in wages so far. So that's approximately 50 million labor hours remaining in the voter approved projects in Sound Transit 3 that are either in planning now or about to be kicked off for planning, or will be start planning in the near future. From our analysis, we know that people of color performed 30% of our work from 2016 to 2020, 7.5% women workers, and that's compared to a 3% figure nationally. Next slide. So what's included in program realignment? I alluded to that. Projects currently under construction are not affected by program realignment. Projects with adopted baseline budgets are not affected by program realignment. So those are the projects that were already in the pipeline, have already been baselined with they're not cost estimates anymore, they're baseline budgets. And those projects will, have been prioritized to make sure what we started can be completed. And those projects are all on schedule. Projects that are currently in planning and development are affected. So that is our projects in Seattle. The West Seattle Ballard project has been in planning for a couple years now. Same with Tacoma Dome Link Extension. Our BRT projects, which they're all currently in planning, and they are subject to program realignment to ensure that whatever projects we start construction in, we can finish with the financing and the revenue that we have. And then projects that have not yet start planning and development are affected. So as Erik said, we're just kicking off EVLE. That planning is going to get started, but the project is subject to the program realignment to ensure that we can finish what we start. And there's a lot of other projects. For example, the light rail to Issaquah that hasn't started planning. Projects like that are also, it could be affected by program realignment. Next slide. So here's a list specifically of the projects. The green projects are projects that are in construction. A Northgate Link is going to open October 2nd. So we'll have those 3 new stations opening from the University Stadium Station to Northgate. Of course, Linwood is in construction. And then you see the projects there in the north and central corridor that are subject to program realignment. So that is the 522 BRT, the 130th infill station, Everett Link, OMF North, Sounder North parking access, and then the rest are Central Link projects. Next slide. Okay, here's the timeline for program realignment. We started way back in March 2020. That's when we started the conversation with our board. And in April, we officially informed the board that the program was unaffordable with the reduced revenues that were coming in. At the end of 2022, the board approved a transportation improvement plan with a placeholder. It was a 5-year delay for all the projects that were subject to realignment to ensure that we had an affordable TIP and finance plan and budgeting process for 2020. The board also passed a couple motions during this time to help direct our program realignment process, and they adopted criteria for Sound Transit staff to evaluate projects by, and they also gave us direction to continue to look for increased revenue and funding. And in January, we laid out the process. The board chair and vice chairs agreed to a process to get us to a program realignment in July. So earlier this month, we kicked off public engagement via an online survey. It does close today at 5. So if you're interested, you still have 4.5 hours, I think if I did the math right, to do the online survey, which hopefully you've seen and done already. And then that input will go to the board in May, on top of all the input we have gotten from a lot of stakeholder meetings and stakeholder meetings that we are going to continue in May. We do think in May, our board will start to look at realignment scenarios that are financially constrained and have the sub-area equity lens on them. So those will be becoming public in May with the public input. And then in July, they'll adopt a realignment plan. So that will allow us to adopt a 22 final budget and transportation improvement plan. Next slide. So earlier I talked briefly about some federal funding we've received since the pandemic began. And we have gotten funding from the CARES Act, that's the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. We also got funding from CRSA, which is Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, and the more recently approved passed American Rescue Plan. So we have gotten considerable funding, and that is built into the April financing plan that gave us that affordability gap of still $8 billion. We are working closely on the American Jobs Plan, Biden's infrastructure initiative, and working to be a big part of federal funding in that plan. Next slide. Okay, so these are, again, the board steps. In May, the board's going to see some scenarios based on what we've heard as priorities from different sub areas and board members. And then you're going to have some concrete realignment plans in June. And then the current plan of the board chair is to adopt realignment plans in July. Next slide. So that's the slides we have prepared today. We're open to questions, concerns, input for our remaining time. Thank
I
you.
see Joe Kunzler's hand first. So Joe, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Couple questions here, and I'm going to be quick so others can hopefully raise their hands on the Zoom function. Number one is back to slide, I think it was 7. What about when we're going to have public input on the Everett Link stations? And Everett Link alternatives development. I'm just wondering when's public input on that, if there's a website for that, that kind of thing. And the second question is can we please have a copy of all the slides of today, please? So there you go.
Absolutely. Yes, I plan on sending this off to Brock after this is over so he can share that with the group. As far as public input for EVLE, it's coming soon. I mean, we're already doing some initial stakeholder outreach that kind of involve. Hello?
Carrie? I think Carrie just froze. So.
Do you still see me? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. Well, but yes, I mean, in the coming months, it's going to be kicking off. Right now, we're kind of in the initial information gathering. The interagency group for Everett Link, that's the jurisdictional partners, WSDOT, Community Transit, along with the cities and county, are working together currently on the IAG. And so as we start to get into that, and as this realignment process works out, we are going to start going to the public. We'll have a website that's coming out in a couple of months. I'll make sure that this group sees that. And also I'll make sure that the group has my contact information, because anytime you need anything, reach out to me. I'm happy to help you out. I've been working on this in different capacities and old jobs for over a decade now. So I'm really excited about getting light rail to Everett. And so the more people, the merrier. I just think it's great and so excited for it.
Thanks, Erik. Thank you.
Anyone else?
There's got to be questions from folks.
Well, people are getting ready to ask a question. I guess what I would go ahead and talk about here is there's been a few board members that have asked, do we have to have realignment wrapped up in July? And so, what I think CEO Rogoff has pointed out time and time again here is the critical fact that we did this, once in 2010 with realignment, and nothing is set in stone, right? So we're going to adopt this realignment plan, knowing that the financial outlook could get better, it could get worse, and we have to be nimble in order to do this. We're committed to delivering ST3, and we want to get it delivered as close as on time as we can. And so if you look at what happened with ST2, we came out where we pulled projects back, extended timelines for dates of revenue service, and along the way the picture did get better financially, and we were able to come back and actually get things done on time. And so right now we're in that phase of we're going to come out with this plan for the scenario we know today, and then adapt from that as time goes on. Still no questions. Quiet group today.
I might have or miss if you answered this, but someone in chat, Claire, she owns property in the Everett Station. She's wondering if there's a reason for the increase in cost for ST3.
Yeah, if you pay, I can forward more information on this too, but really the two main things come from property acquisition right away and construction costs. I don't think that any of us saw this coming in terms of the real estate rates just continuing to climb at the beginning of the pandemic. If you compare what happened in ST2 and the last recession, there was a point where if you walked into a construction hall, the only people that were giving construction building trades jobs was Sound Transit. That is far from the case now. I don't know if anyone's tried to hire a contractor recently, but they are so busy, it's just insane. And the same thing goes with just the acquisition of property. West Seattle Ballard has seen astronomical rises in real estate property, and that's really what it comes down to. And this, looking at when you're this early in a lot of that planning work, it's not until you get to that 60% design that you really have your baseline budgets. So that's where your issues are. It looks like Ty has a question. I have two Ties. Ty, let's go with Ty Farrell.
Hi, thanks. I was wondering, Well, you've only talked about realignment in a general sense, and I guess I'm curious what some of the specifics are. If you're, if there are specific options on the table, like is one option not going to Everett, and is another option, for example, what some people are talking about, having a spur to Boeing and having a straight line from Linwood to Everett, which would save a lot of money and increase the time when the link was connected to Everett. Are those some of the options on the table? Or are there other things that you could speak
So
to
yeah,
specifically?
what I think I would make the most sense for me to do is to send the latest board slides that basically run through some of those options. We started out with some illustrative options, running through everything from phasing projects to doing projects based on certain criteria. And as we get into this next month, we're really going to talk about all those things along with sub-area equity. And if you're not familiar with sub-area equity, that's basically the dollars that are raised in Snohomish County will be spent primarily in Snohomish County and throughout the region. So the one thing with Snohomish County and sub-area equity is there has always been less dollars because of it, just because of the number of homes and the population. And so essentially, when you talk about the spur, that's something that I think will probably continue to come up. And the way that I would respond to that today is that the representative alignment that I showed earlier on slide 3 or whatever, that is what the voters passed. And we are here to deliver what the voters passed. Can the board look at that and approach taking that out like the urbanist suggested? It is possible, but it is a much different lift than what realignment is. Realignment is financial and time. It's not actual alignment of the tracks. Does that make sense? And I feel like I'm missing another question in there. In terms of other, real life scenarios, that's what the board's working on. That includes everything from what you might have seen Dave Summers, Executive Summers, refer to as minimum operable segment, that basically getting up to Mariner and then going up to Everett in basically 2 tracks. Everett Link is 16 miles, and that's the longest extension by twice as much of any other extension on Sound Transit. And so typically when you see some link rail extension that long, it's done in 2 or 3 buckets. We opted to do this all at once, and that's something that I think will get toyed around with a lot. But we're going to do this basically on every single one of those projects that's up for discussion, and the board has to come to an agreement on how we get there. So what I would stress to this group is when you have these, if you have an idea that you like, let me know, let the board know, let your local electeds know. I mean, Dave Summers, Nicholas Smith, Paul Roberts have just been nothing but great for the community and for the county and advocating for you. They're the ones that do all the heavy lifting, but they can only do so much. So when you step up and let us know what you're thinking, that's very helpful to the process. And if did I answer everything, Ty?
Yeah, that was helpful. And I think that Urban article also mentioned that Everett has received the least amount of funding relative to the amount that it's put in so far. And just wondering if there are any considerations in terms of maybe investing a little bit more earlier in anticipation of the light rail link.
Yeah, and that's a more complicated question than just it's not like money that is coming from Snohomish County is just going elsewhere. It's really comes down to once you get into the actual construction of the project, that's where the money gets spent. So when that time comes, it's not like it's not dollar for dollar how things work. The sub-area equity piece kind of makes it look more skewed than it is, but I can always share more information with you on that. And I'm not the financial guy to give you the details on it, but happy to follow up. Can we go to Tyler?
Yes.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Kind of a general question along those same lines that Ty raised in terms of realigning the tracks physically, thinking about maybe not going to Boeing. I was wondering if, and I'm bringing this up because I've seen the new green line, I think it is, the Swift bus line on Airport Road. Perhaps I'm not looking at it at the correct times of day, but I'm seeing a lot of pretty empty buses. And I understand we're building a system for the future and not for today's use, but I question how many people who work at Boeing live south and live in Seattle. And my sense living up here is that most of the Boeing workers today live to the north and to the east in places like Arlington and Marysville and other places that are experiencing a lot of growth. Part of that is just cost of living relative to Seattle is much less. People can get more, you know, have a half acre or whatever they desire and commute from the north. So I'm wondering if we've really taken a critical look at how many people are going to use the system to go to Boeing, how much value that adds. And it's such a short distance from Boeing to I-5. Why isn't there a bus connector? It seems like this type of system is well served by having local bus connections to the main spine. And then additionally, and I don't know if Boeing can share this information, but do we have information from Boeing in terms of where people live? Where do their employees live? Can they share that, and has that been included?
I can only speak to what I know from my previous role when I worked in the Senate, and this whole plan was being formed. I think the county, the port, all had something to say about that in reaching out to Sound Transit before it went to the voters. I can tell you that I agree with you that I think that a lot of their workers do live north and out east. But the numbers from what Boeing shared with those partners at the time did support that there was ridership throughout the whole region. I think that things like this will be revisited. And I just stress, this is the type of stuff that the board needs to hear from people like you. I'm not the advocate anymore, whereas in the past, my previous roles, I've been an advocate. And it is important for everyone here on this call to say, hey, this is something to think about. I mean, Joe, you do a great job of making sure you pay attention to what happens at the board, and not everybody has the time to do that, but it is that feedback that helps us and helps our, the board members in Snohomish County really shape what they're asking for. And I think that's really key. The other thing that I like to point out about the westward swing out towards Boeing is when you look at demographics, something we didn't touch on much today is in terms of what that westward swing, who that really covers, that's especially the provisional station there at Airport Road. That is the highest level of diversity, the lowest income families, the most transit dependent riders. You talk to community transit, they know this too. And there's a reason why that provisional station is there, because that even though, as you think of the westward swing, it's often just everyone's getting from Everett to downtown Seattle. And that's not the case necessarily. That's a piece of it. But you've got people that will be riding along that corridor that are taking airport, if it was there, the Airport Road station going up north. And potentially they're working at a manufacturing site next to Boeing. So there's a lot more that goes into that. And these are the types of questions we need to be going into and asking our board members as we get in through the realignment process.
Okay.
Before we get to you, Joe, Ed also has a question that he asked to ask in the chat. So,
am I on mute or am I?
I hear you.
Okay. I'm interested. I got lost in the phasing. You had a phase 1 and a phase 2 and a 18 to 22 month process, and I didn't get if that phase 1 happens first and then the 18 to 22 months, and can you talk a little bit of more detail about what you expect to do and what opportunities there will be for input during that phasing?
Absolutely. So when I say phase 1 alternatives development, that's essentially all the work over 18 to 22 months starting now that leads into kind of a funnel that ends up going to the Sound Transit Board. And essentially the elected leadership group of that will be the final decider that sends something to the Sound Transit Board to say, this is our preferred alternative for the alignment and where the stations go, along with some other alternatives that came up through the process that were supported throughout from the community, from stakeholders, from everyone that we could reach out to and get involved. That includes this group. So as we start to get into that and the IAG, the interagency group, comes up with these things, that's where we're really going to want to come back and say, okay, here's exactly what we're looking at in terms of the station. What do you think? There's 5 options here, there's 6 options here. And that's going to be what leads to what goes to environmental review, which is the next phase of the project. That's the big next step. But once you get to environmental review and it goes through the FTA and they look at everything, you're not going to, the likelihood of drastically changing where that station is very small at that point. And so the output, the input that we get from you and the output that happens in those later phases is more nuanced. It's kind of, we start this large level, 10,000 feet to figure out where the station goes. And then you kind of get down into a funnel of the more, like the end of the details of would be like, what's the art at the station? How does the station feel? Those types of things that Brock's going to be talking about with some of the sketches here later. Does that make sense?
So you're saying that we will pretty much have a designated location for the station in October, November 22 up to February or March of 23.
Roughly, yes. And I think the thing to point out here is that the FTA has the final record of decision. And so regardless of what we tell them, what we show them, they can come back and say, this doesn't work for whatever reason. But typically what you see is the consensus that we're trying to build here is, what does the community want? Where do you want it here? Do you want it here? And why? And is it feasible? If you look at the great work that Snohomish County has done with light rail communities, they have their preferred station there at Ashway, actually on the other side of the freeway, which would mean Sound Transit goes back over the freeway again, and then back over again to get to the west side. So we're going to look at that because they put in a lot of really great work. And whether it's financially feasible, I couldn't tell you yet, but we're going to look at that. And so as the public starts to give us input on these things, we'll take that into consideration and look at the criteria that we have to try to move this forward as best as we can.
My other question was clarity on sub-area language. What is this Everett sub-area? Where does it start and end?
What do you mean? So it's basically, it's broken out into like the Snohomish sub area, the North, like the North King, South King. I can send you a map if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, there's 4 sub areas, Ed, and it's Snohomish County. Of course, ST doesn't cover all of Snohomish County. So,
but it's from the King Snohomish border to Everett.
Correct. Yeah. Just so everybody is aware, since we have 45 participants at the moment, Ed Peterson, strategic advisor to Housing Hope, and ESDA board president. So,
Joe, before we get to you, can we go to Craig? Because I haven't heard from Craig yet. I saw that he had a question. Is that all right?
I'll be quick because this is kind of following up on what you said earlier. So
Sure,
I'll be
of
very
course.
quick. It's in, there's a link in the chat, but, I'm asking the Sound Transit Board to consider remote testimony after the pandemic. There's a Google letter you can sign. I need that signed by like 3 p.m. Wednesday because, I want to turn it into the board executive committee to get staff working on that because we don't know right now our remote meetings where you can testify from home or Zoom. That's all based on a governor's proclamation, and that could change any moment.
Joe, it looks like you already put it in the chat. So we're gonna otherwise keep this focused on.
I'm just about done. Mark. And Erik, you said something earlier about 2 phases. Did you mean reopen part of Everett Link ahead and then open the second half when that's done? And I'll stop there so we can.
Yes, that is something that the board has discussed and something that Executive Summers has said, I would rather see phasing than scrapping Everett Link. And I can tell you, no one's talking about scrapping Everett Link. And if you look at the board criteria being used for realignment, there's some very key things such as tenure, finishing the spine. Those 2 things are really key to Everett. I mean, we all know that since Sound Move, Everett has been on track to be done. Somewhere along the line, and I don't know the history enough, my apologies, but when ST2 was brought to the voters, as opposed to what it said in motion 1 on with Sound Move, basically you had Everett Link was supposed to be put into the front of the queue for ST2, and it wasn't when it went to voters. The voters still approved it. So we go by what the voters have approved over the years, which I think causes some consternation for those of us that want to see Everett Link done. Do we have time for Craig?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. Hey, Craig, how are you? Are you still there?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. My question relates to prioritizing projects in Everett specifically. With phase 2, I believe the commitment from the Sound Transit Board was that Everett would be first priority. And in fact, there was a motion passed back in 1994.
That's what I was just referencing, yes.
Yep, that says that we'll be first. And that's what I relied on when I voted for Sound Transit. And I think, many of our voters did. And how do you speak to the fact that now you're looking at possibly other priorities versus Everett in this next go round?
Yeah, like I said, I wish I'll dig into the history on this because this is something that I myself have asked in the past before I worked here. That motion was made before ST2 was even a thing, right? It was a motion saying when ST2 comes around, this will be the top priority or one of the top priorities.
Exactly right. To incentivize voters in Snohomish County to vote for it. And
100%. So whatever the board did at the time when they brought ST2 to the voters, something changed. I don't know if it was board agendas. I don't know if Joe Marine was on the board at that time, but that's the thing that I couldn't answer for you today. So who was on the board that brought ST2 as is the voters? Because it was ultimately a board decision to say, actually, we're going to do it like this. And maybe it was to, expand more east-west with it. I don't really understand that. But it's something that Peter Rogoff has addressed at several different locations to say, hey, this at the end of the day, whatever happened between there and there, ST2 was brought to the voters without that. But I agree. I think that it's something that people would like to see. And once again, I'll just say that having people from Snohomish County reach out to our board and say that is very critical. Because your board members here in Snohomish County are doing that job. They are carrying the water and really doing a good job of it. But they can only do so much. I wish I had a better answer, but that's where it's at.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I have one question, just I think that might be the last question, and then we can wrap it up here. Your presentation to City Council provided some timelines of how much the project could be delayed. It seems like under all circumstances, we're at a delay of at least a year, but more likely 2 years for most of the projects, just in part because of the pandemic. Can you help explain that piece of it, which is like, even if we have full funding and don't delay on the project, that we're still getting delayed a year or two on the project?
Well, under that scenario that you just described, I mean, if we close the affordability gap completely, there's a chance that we could do things without losing time. Okay. That's the likelihood. Who knows, right? If Biden comes out with the transportation package that sets us straight and just puts rail out there, because he's talking about everything green, I think that that's what we do. Fantastic. But the problem is when you have capital projects that go out 2 decades, and our debt limit is, kind of artificial in a sense. I mean, we can only go up to that debt limit. We can only take so much cash in at a time. So as we start to delay, any delays today affect us tomorrow. And that's really where the delays start to happen, even if we get back to a point of being fully on budget. But when you look at, it's really going to be, I would encourage everyone to watch the board meeting this month or in May, because as they start to talk about how this works out with sub-area equity, that will be a conversation that'll really shape potentially where the board goes with it. I can tell you that West Seattle Ballard isn't going to get cheaper, and there's a lot of people that want it, but I would suggest that the longer you wait on Everett, the more expensive it's going to get as well, right? I don't envision, with all the fantastic work that the city of Everett and Snohomish County is just doing in general, that property values are dropping anytime soon. And that continues to be the cost that we cannot control. And as we do the initial planning, the preliminary planning on these projects, we typically give a pretty good buffer for what that price increase is going to be. But, you know, if you saw the board talk about the North Bus base there in Kenya Park, I mean, it went from, I think, our 30% increase estimate to, I think, 70%. That's just unheard of. And we can't buy all the property all at once. We have to buy it, you know, as we're working on these projects, and that creates a difficult task for us to reach.
Well, this has been a fantastic presentation. I want to draw people's attention to a few links I dropped into the chat earlier in the meeting, just because I think today's the last day for the survey that the agency has. So you have a few hours left to go out there and fill out your online survey. Of course, there'll be other forms to engage, but that's the first link back at 12:39 if you're going in the chat. There's also a page for, oh, yeah.
I was going to interrupt you because I saw Ty's question, and just wanted to say that as far as I know, no, it doesn't, as the bill passed. But I would just point out that tax increment financing passing as it did is a huge win for the state. Me, with my background in economic development, I've been pushing for this for a decade, and to see it pass in any form in Washington State's a really big deal. Yes, I think in the future this could be expanded, but how they climbed that mountain and passed it this year is beyond me, because we've been trying so long. And with Speaker Chop, who's been the real opponent of this step down as speaker, I still didn't think that he was going to let it through. So cheers to everyone on this call that had any.
Do a quick synopsis of what is tax increment financing for everybody. Erik or Ty, you want to give a crack at it?
I'll let Ty go, because Ty will do it much better justice.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the best person to talk about it, but it's basically taking advantage of the appreciation of the property, the future tax value of the property for development purposes, or of any number of properties within a jurisdiction, and using the future anticipated appreciation to fund the projects. Is that, Carrie's shaking her head yes, so I get that right?
Yeah, that's close. That's close. That's good. For everybody's understanding, that works. So just a couple more things, I think. We had a project, the corridor project manager has stepped aside, and we have a new project manager. You want to mention who that is, Erik?
Yes. So after spending 4 years with us, Cameron Grohl was poached by King County to go be their director of wastewater. So really excited for him. Disappointing to lose such a great leader, but I understand that he's on to bigger and better things, and we'll see him down the pipe somewhere. And we were lucky enough to get Sandra Fan, who we're pulling from West Seattle Ballard, and has done just some great work with the organization. When our team found out that she was coming on board, everyone's eyes lit up at Newer, and she's been a pleasure to work with. What she brings to our team is someone that's been through this alternatives development process, I think 3 times on different link projects. So we couldn't be luckier with who we got, because she steps right in with just this wealth of knowledge that's fantastic. So I invited Sandra initially, but she had a previous engagement. She's been on our team now for less than 2 weeks, but we'll definitely be excited to get back and give you another update in the coming months.
Ed had one more question, so
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about parking, and there I understand are 2 parking facilities in the original plan, but there's been conversation about and consideration being given to whether to reduce the commitment to parking as a part of the solution to the shortfall of funding. Can you tell us a little bit more about where that particular item stands?
I might defer to Carrie on this, but I'll get a crack at it, and she can fix any errors in my ways. But essentially, that's one of the things that people are looking at in this realignment process. As everyone on this call probably knows, parking is expensive. And I think there's a couple of trains of thought that if you don't have parking, people won't use it. And if you don't have parking, then it'll force people to figure out how to use it without parking. I think our numbers show that a lot of the times it's not the people that live far away that are utilizing the parking, it's the people that live within a mile often. And what I would hope that, we come to a conclusion on is, the best option to get Everett downtown done. I mean, let's get to Everett and then, whatever that takes. But I think that's going to be a conversation that has to be had with the board and largely in the community, because different communities want different things. I'm sure that you've seen that just even within Snohomish County, but you go into the Sound Transit region and it's kind of all over the place. Carrie, anything else I should add?
Yeah, I'll add in the illustrative scenarios that have been run, because we do have some vocal board members that have asked very specifically and explicitly to run scenarios to see if you can delay some parking and really prioritize the transit aspects of projects. So going forward, when you see scenarios that are financially constrained, I think you'll continue to see those scenarios, so board members can weigh those priorities and see the impacts. But Eric's exactly right. There's we're really excited to see the survey results too, to see how people that responded, look at prioritizing the project. So there's a very wide range of feelings and perspectives about parking, and that's going to be a super hard decision for the board to look at the impacts, the pros and cons, and make those decisions. So,
is this a decision that will be made in July?
Well, that is currently the chair's timeline. Yes, is to adopt that framework, which and the idea is the framework would be flexible depending on future financial plans and what money we bring in, but it's prioritizing projects that will come back earlier as we find cost savings and also increase revenue. But I do think that that parking piece is going to be part of that conversation between now and July, or whenever that they adopt the final framework.
Thank you.
Erik, I asked you a question in the chat, by the way.
I was going to say, when we wrapped up, I'll be sure to go into the chat and get all the questions and comments, because when I'm presenting, I don't like to try to be reading and typing while I'm talking to you. It's just too cumbersome. So that will not go unnoticed. And I'll drop probably a couple links as well before I look at Brock's and make sure we don't double up our efforts, because I kind of interrupted him.
I want to thank you both, Erik and Carrie, for joining us today. This is fantastic. I hope you'll stay for the next little bit here to see the work that Jennifer has done. It's always a pleasure to work with you over the past, I don't know, Carrie, we've been working since 2010. So it's been great. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I'm gonna have to pull up the presentation. So that is not what I wanted. So let me just lead in and say, Jennifer Cow, ESDA's urban planning coordinator, has done a fantastic job in coming up with illustrations. This isn't necessarily her forte in terms of drawing light rail projects, but the point here today is to help open up our minds of what it could look and feel like coming into Everett eventually, right? And to start the conversation with some grounding of like what this could be. So I'm going to lead off the first part, and then I'm going to hand it off to Jennifer to go through the illustrations that she created. And we have I think 4 or 5 different illustrations or 4 or 5 different alternatives. So you can see where the station would be and where the structure would look like in the neighborhood. So I'm going to start with just making sure everybody kind of knows what a light rail station looks like. This one is not open yet. This is Northgate currently from the top of a parking garage. Took a photo, and you're looking west looking at the east side of the structure. So you can see it's a 3-story. Well, there's the ground floor, and then there's the mezzanine level, and then there's the platform level. And so there's the 3 levels there. What's unique about Northgate is that it also has bus bays around the base of it. And so one of actually the representative alignment that Sound Transit has produced for ST3 would be a lot like this in many ways. So you can see it's a pretty big structure when you're underneath it. On the left there, that's not actually part of the light rail. It connects into the station. It's the new bike ped bridge that's being built across I-5. So looking at Everett, this is obviously an aerial view looking down towards the west a bit. And I've circled where Everett Station is, since the screenshot I took is a little blurry. And then you can see downtown where the bigger buildings are. Just so kind of Everett Station District Alliance kind of considers its boundaries to be Broadway, which is, if you can see my cursor on the screen, is there, and Hewitt here. And then here's I-5. And if you were to go off to the left, that's south towards Seattle. So zooming in now, a little bit closer. Jennifer has drawn illustrations for different alignments. And one is along Broadway, another is along McDougal, and these are very simple renderings. To make it clear, these are definitely just conceptual renderings we're about to see. The cyan blue here is the representative alignment location, which is what voters approved, or what was the conceptual idea of what would be built under ST3. And then we have the darker blue, which is just basically the same, but on the other side of the bus bay, right up against the BNSF railway on the west side. And the green line, which would go over the tracks and go up to this parking lot. And Sound Transit actually owns that parking lot today. And this last one, it obviously hasn't really been on the table in terms of a formal public process. And Sound Transit, again, will do its own alternatives analysis and do its own renderings of what it might look like in the future. And so we're just starting to start the conversation with some concepts. I'm gonna just cover what the city's priority is here, because this is the first one that Jennifer will show of her illustrations. So the city's priority within their comprehensive plan and the Metro Everett plan that they adopted in 2018 is to have a light rail station located at Pacific and McDougal, or Pacific and Broadway. It's between Broadway and McDougal. So you can see here that going down towards the south, the tracks would either go Broadway or McDougal, and then there's a little tail that comes because the trains have to get off. And the reason why the city was excited about this is that it can make all sorts of new connections towards downtown. One is the closest towards downtown, so that's a piece of it. And then they had some really big ideas for how to redo the grid structure of the streets. So this image is looking from downtown towards the southeast, towards where the station would be. And you can see that they have not only had put the station over the top of Pacific Avenue here, they built a new bike ped, or they show a new bike ped bridge going up here to what is Wall Street. And then the biggest change would be actually Pacific Avenue we have a new bridge structure so that it goes over the top of McDougal. Where right now it dips down towards McDougal and creates an intersection which is impassable if you're a pedestrian during traffic. And then there's a hill currently that goes up. So their idea is to do it like this, and then to do a bunch of transit-oriented development right next to the station. One final rendering, and I think this one's a little blurry because it's kind of a bad screenshot from their report. So this is a cross section of that to show the different levels of what they're thinking for their project, which is the McDougal level, which would actually have under their plans kind of be a bus mall. McDougal would be turned into a bus mall. Pacific, which would be at floor, which would be what the agency typically considers their mezzanine level of their light rail stations. So people could just walk straight from Broadway or Pacific into that mezzanine level of the station. And then the station platform level would be one up. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to talk about her renderings.
For the backdrop. So just going straight into it, we saw the city's renderings or diagrams of the McDougal preference. And so this is the live, or what it would look like potentially if we were to create the light rail. One thing everyone would notice is these blocks that the station would be on will most likely have to be demolished. So all buildings will most likely be torn down here. And right now we are looking from downtown about southwest. So fortunately the station did not erect itself. So we can see the station's back there in the corner. And then I believe Brock, you can jump in whatever if I'm missing something, but Pacific would most likely turn into some sort of bus route right there. Yeah.
The idea from Community Transit and Everett Transit with this would be like the Swift bus rapid transit corridor, kind of the heavy regional bus zone. Yeah.
And then of course the ground floor of this is right on McDougal. And then as reference, the station would most likely be about 20 feet above Pacific. So it'd be a bit short. So you'll be driving under a pretty large structure if you're on Pacific. Next slide, please. This is the same thing, but from a different perspective. We're now looking northbound on McDougal. This is just so we have a better idea of, as a user, what is this going to look like? And yep, next slide, please. And then same thing, except now we're still looking north, and now we're seeing Pacific up ahead on the street and the station in more detail.
Yeah, you can see the idea that there'd be a bus mall on McDougal here. So it's nicely illustrated there.
And then the alternative to that, this is actually one of the first renderings Brock and I actually came up with. So I would say that it is most likely the most inaccurate or not true to form of what it would potentially look like if we were to use the Broadway. As Brock mentioned, if it was Broadway, it would still be on those blocks, except on more adjacent to Broadway as opposed to more close to McDougal. But for these renderings, initially I went and put it in the middle, just looking at some other light rail stations downtown. And so those were my influence at the time. But most likely the case is it will not be this tall. It might be like 2/3 the height. It'd definitely be a little wider, and it probably would not be on Broadway itself. But this would just kind of would lead as a conversation. Maybe some people might hop on board and might interest.
Yeah, I mean, we need to probably work on this a little bit, just like a couple of, but for one thing, the city's alternative Broadway option would not actually go north of the on Broadway, so like from this intersection, but it'd be mostly south. But what this does illustrate, I think helpfully, is that to put it on Broadway would require putting it within the right of way someplace. And that would have a major structure, be a major structure on a major street into the city. So this alignment would probably be more to the south of this intersection than to the north, but you can see how much of an impact it could have on Broadway. The same would be true on McDougal as well, because of just the presence on the street.
And the next slide is the same thing, just now we're a little closer, just so we have a better idea of, you know, how large this infrastructure is. And then now we will be to the S23 alignment. This one, which is the original proposed one, is going to be adjacent to Smith Avenue. And the station itself would just kind of integrate into the bus bays, where a bus would just be driving underneath or around the station. And this one's going to follow along I-5, and it's going to curve through this brownfield site through the parking lot, and then it will end just right before the Everett station.
Yeah, and it's possible that the pilings here would actually be in the median here where the trees are between Smith and the parking lot, but this gives the concept of the scale that would come in as it comes into the station.
And that's the pedestrian bridge over there on the right for those who aren't familiar. Here's just a ground floor level of what it would be like, let's say we were catching a bus or just in the bus space. I'm looking up towards the station. Very reminiscent of the North Gate station that Brock showed us earlier. And then this will be a bird's eye view. So we have a good idea of what that's going to look like as it follows along I-5 and comes downwards. Although for this, Brock, correct me if I'm wrong, the tail end of this, would it stay elevated or would it come down to the?
It would definitely stay elevated, yeah. So that each of these have to require a tail after the station, so that way potentially the trains could change to the other tracks. And so under the representative alignment within ST3, there is a tail that goes out in front of Everett Station currently where there's currently a park or a small kind of there's some art features there and some sitting, and so the tail would go into that space.
And then similarly to that, the alternative is we would move the station where it would be more adjacent to the existing train tracks. The one big difference in this one is instead of having those 3-tiered station, we might even consider having just this one floor where buses directly interact with it. And since they have full access to using the existing bus bays, we might not need to consider bus flow underneath the station. And so using a 1-story station might work in this scenario. But other than that, it's quite similar. It just might hug along the parking site on a different side, just where the train tracks connect from I-5.
The one thing that I think this illustration and maybe the one before it helps is the alignment, on the rail track going towards the south here. It has to get up to elevation and then it goes along I-5 and across Smith and along I-5 to the south. So that's helpful, and I think is going to be helpful in the next, but soon in the next version that you'll show.
Yep, and then same thing, this is just more an aerial view, what that would look like if it came and wrapped along the train tracks. But yeah, very similar to the S23, just placement of station is the big difference here. And then different perspective. Yep, now we're on I-5 looking down, so you can better see the tapering of the tracks.
In our illustration, we've also upgraded our light rail train to so we're ambitious.
I like that train.
Ending on not the highest of notes, ran into some issues with the rendering, and it's been 3 hours, and this render is still rendering. So unfortunately, it did not finish in time for the meeting, but we do have a very basic SketchUp and frankly ugly rendering of what the alternative route, if the train were to go across the tracks into the east side of the tracks, as opposed to staying on the west side and going into the station, it would cross the train tracks here, and then the station would be on the existing Sound Transit parking lot. And it would not extend that far in the future. It's gonna end probably taper downwards at the end where the tail is underneath Pacific Bridge, and then the train could just turn around. And then there are some other plans regarding potentially moving parking over there, which we have not shown here yet, but may show in our future renditions. And there may be one more.
Yeah.
Yep. So now this is here from right across Everett Station, what that would look like. And some people might be wondering, how are users going to cross the street and get to the other side. And right now, it seems like the best, or the scenario is people will have to cross the train tracks to get to the other side. And Brock and I have discussed other alternatives, such as a pedestrian bridge or creating some kind of funky station that's kind of two-tiered and with the bridge. But on a basic level, we most likely will have to cross the train tracks to get to the station area and downtown.
Yeah, there's, is that the last slide? Yeah. So, you know, just for sake of conversation, you're basically looking, this perspective is almost like direct, like you're up in the air above Pacific Avenue, looking southeast here. And potentially, you know, that this could connect, there could be an extension of the Pacific Avenue Bridge or something of where that's the main route to get across the tracks. Or even a connection directly from the light rail station into Everett Station. So there, you know, there's all sorts of design alternatives to think through here. We're just providing some concepts. One of the benefits of this route, well, there's two kind of primary benefits of this route, which is from the agency's perspective, there's only 2 properties on this side, one of which they own. And then the other is it can go at grade fairly easily. Once it gets across the tracks, it could drop down, and then they wouldn't have to build all of the support structures and the 2 levels of the mezzanine and the platform level. So that would reduce the cost potentially, without considering, you know, additional pedestrian bridge improvements. So, so with that, I'm going to flip back to the kind of the alignment slide, which is real simple. And then just go to actually stop share. We've got 10 minutes here, so we can chat about kind of your thoughts of what it would mean to have light rail come into the station and the potential locations.
I have a quick radical idea. Why not have the station, the light rail station above the bus bay that's there right now, and then have people go right down from the train down one level to the buses directly? Would that be humanly possible?
So yeah, I believe that's essentially what the SD3 representative alignment shows, which is the station directly above the main bus bays. Well, you know, the bus bay that's closest to Smith, right? Like there's kind of 2 sets of islands, right? There's the island that's between Smith Avenue and the interior bus loop, and then there's the actual interior bus bay. And the representative alignment puts it essentially right over the top of the one between Smith and the rest of the bus bays. And so there would be a loop there under the representative alignment. Yeah. The city within the Metro Everett plan really wanted to prioritize the location to be as close to downtown as possible, encouraging people to walk, you know, to and from the densest part of the city. So. And they were also probably a little concerned about the disruption caused to their bus base, but something to work on.
I'm just trying to think of how do we make the experience easier for people to, you know, connect to light rail from home instead of drive and park. That's kind of my thinking.
Yeah.
Oh, and Jennifer KO rocks. Just wanted to clear it up.
Victor.
Yep.
Does the city still envision making Pacific level from Pacific or from Smith to Broadway?
Yeah, they're
having that dip at the at McDougal.
Yeah, as I described, the city's preferred location includes a full design of that location, which includes raising Pacific
Thank you.
for that 2-block segment. I know there's actually some people in in the meeting right now who is probably part of those corridors, or part of those conversations. So they can feel free to speak up if they like to talk about those.
Kern McGee raised their hand, Brooke.
Oh yeah, please, Kern. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
I'm a Riverside resident and also on the transportation subcommittee of the Downtown Everett Association. So I am very interested in active means of getting into downtown. The key barrier to fully funding Sound Transit seems to be property acquisition right now. And I want to hear about any progress that has been made or thinking towards preemptively acquiring property before the alignment is set and property values skyrocket.
Do we still have Erik on the call, or Carrie?
Yes, if I can figure out how to unmute. I mean, so I can give a follow-up on that because I'm not the one that's doing property acquisition. However, I mean, it really comes down to a cash on hand. We don't just have, we don't have all the costs collected for this, and that's the key thing. As I talked about the debt limit earlier, we can only take in so much because of that debt limit, and so right now we're putting dollars into where the construction is actually happening and where we're acquiring property for that. I agree. I mean, it'd be nice if we could just do it, but also we can't necessarily buy all the land going up to Everett when we don't know exactly where that is going to be. And until we get the sign off on this alternatives development and it goes through the environmental review, that's the big holdup on purchasing massive amounts of property.
Thank you, Erik. And that does match my understanding. I'm talking more about the city of Everett, which we're talking about this elevation of Pacific, which may not be a Sound Transit project at all, or there must be elements of this, whether it's pedestrian access or realigning some side streets not directly related to the light rail station itself. Is the city of Everett squirreling money away right now to do some of these major capital projects?
That I would defer to Tom if he was on. He might have the best answer for that, but I'm not sure if he's still on.
I think he's still here. Tom, are you able to take a, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So specifically for that project, no, but it's on our, I believe it's in the transportation improvement plan, something that we could pursue grants for. We have other projects that are unfunded that we know that if we had them, they would improve various opportunities within the city. So we have not set up a fund for this, but it is on our list of things we would like to be able to do.